Welcome to Toxicology, brought to you by Recovery Unplugged, the place where we talk about all things substance abuse, recovery, and mental health, with guests offering varying perspectives and viewpoints. Hosts Joseph Gordo and Jason Cabello share about their addiction and recovery and other serious subject matter through lighthearted yet candid conversation.
Jason, should we play rock, paper, scissors to see who goes first? I'm just kidding. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Talksicology, the latest and greatest podcast in the known universe, the internet, and everything else on recovery, addiction, and mental health. I am your host, Joseph Gordo, LCDC, and my co-host, who I love so much, Mr. Jason Cabello, is unable to be with us today. He is out fighting crime and stomping curbs and whatever else Jason does in his free time. So it's just going to be me today. Well, not just me by myself. You know, there is a guest, but there's only me as a host, which is really, really sad. So I guess I'm just going to ramble on a little bit before we get started and bring on our guest. But, normally Jason asks me how things are going, and things are going just swell. It is very, very hot in Austin, Texas, and it's just real hot. It is real hot down here. But I did have a book club recommendation to share today. You know, I recently went on vacation, and over the course of my vacation, I read a book called Where Are Your Boys Tonight? It is a oral history of the third wave emo movement or genre, whatever you want to call it. But it's like a Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco, My Chemical Romance, Say Anything. And one thing, dear listener, that I think you'd be interested in is just how many of these artists talked about struggling with addiction during the height of their fame and struggling with mental health issues. And, you know, the interviews were done over the last 5 years. So obviously a lot has changed since the early 2000s. And just so many of them mentioned the fact that back then, you know, mental health was not talked about the way it is today. And I think that's something that's just so wonderful for, you know, our world, our culture, I don't know, our country, maybe. Just how much more awareness there is around mental health and things like addiction and recovery nowadays. Because, I mean, my children know, they are aware of like what anxiety is and mental health. And, my oldest boy's been to therapy before. And frankly, I mean, when I was, 13, I had no idea what, we didn't talk about mental health. Right. So I think it's really great that we talk about it now and can kind of look back on how far we've come, as a people. In how much that conversation is very much a part of everyday life, that it's something that we, there's podcasts about it, right? And I love that because it seems like a way that we can avoid human suffering and get people healthier and happier and just make the world a better place, because that's what I'm all about. It's you know what? I'm just going to stop rambling and go ahead and get to our guest, because our guest today, well, I guess I can't even say our guest. My guest today is a woman who has quite a storied history. I was at work earlier and I shared with some of the team who I was going to be interviewing, and they were like, "Oh, that's going to be good." And everybody's like, "Oh, such and such a fact and such." And I was like, don't tell me. We're going to save it for the podcast. So our guest today is a woman in recovery, a member of the Recovery Unplugged team, someone who I've gotten to watch their journey kind of from afar, to where I don't know a ton of the details, which is really exciting. But a woman who's incredibly passionate about her recovery, about helping other people in their recovery, constantly sending me emails about ways, things that she can do to help the clients have more of what they need and do better. And so, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I give to you Miss Tina Courtney.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. This
Welcome
is very,
to the
very
show.
exciting.
Yeah. This is Tina. You were sharing with me before we started recording. This is the first time you've ever been on a podcast.
Yes. I had great plans to start a podcast,
Yeah.
but I had relapsed, so that was out of the question.
I mean, it would be a very different podcast.
It would not be very enjoyable, but that's what makes this so sweet
Yeah.
to be here.
Yeah. That's so exciting. So, I mean, let's just get started at the beginning, because I really, like I said, some of the folks at residential, Julie was like, oh, did you know such and such? I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. Like, that's amazing. But they were all super excited that you're going to be on the show today. And so let's just start at the beginning, where'd you grow up? What was your life like? What was your family life like growing up?
Well, first of all, I have no idea what stories they've been telling you. They're probably all true. I was born in Dallas. I primarily grew up in Florida, and I had a very nice, really good, healthy childhood.
Yeah.
I don't come from a family of addiction or alcoholism. I come from very loving parents. I can definitely say that I've never felt unloved in my life by my parents.
I have no idea what that feels like.
I think from what I understand, it's a rare thing, but I not even for a second ever felt unloved. I went to school. Well, I kind of bounced around a little bit from Maine and Connecticut, but Florida was my home. Well, I guess it is my home state, truly. Even though I am a native Texan, I went to junior high school, and
the formative years.
Yes, and graduated from the University of South Florida. Go Bulls!
So let me pause you real quick. So I think that's really interesting because we always, when we talk to parents, even sometimes to clients, they always want to know why, right? Like, how did my kid end up being a drug addict? How did I end up being a drug addict? And a lot of the times, most of the time, really, it's like, oh, well, my parents, were alcoholics and it runs in my family.
Right.
Or, clients will point to I'm going through a divorce or I lost a child or, some kind of big traumatic event. But then, there is kind of this other type of addiction, that it's not genetic, it's not any kind of severe trauma. It's just something that sort of happens. Maybe it's because you grew up in Florida. I don't know. But, Florida seems to be a root cause for addiction.
Don't blame Florida.
But, I think that's important because, part of what we do on this podcast is we want people to hear stories that they can connect with, and hear themselves and realize that they're not alone. And it's not very often that we hear the story of, man, I had a good childhood. My parents love each other. They love me. Nothing crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I've, explored my trauma, because everybody has trauma. I mean, being born is trauma. You know, we go from a warm, safe place into this cold world. I had to realize that trauma is trauma.
Yeah,
trauma isn't the event. Trauma is our reaction to it. So I would say that my parents' divorce was trauma for me.
Yeah.
But even before that, I always felt different.
Yeah.
As early as 5 years old, I developed this theory in my 5-year-old brain, which was some people spend 50% of their life happy and then the other 50% miserable. And I would say to myself, I'm so glad I'm dealing with the miserable part now. That way I can be happy when I'm older.
Oh man, you knew percentages already when you were 5 years old. No, I'm just,
But I would look at the other kids.
Yeah.
And they all seemed like they had it together and they were laughing and they were happy. And I felt different, which I think is really, really common for drug addicts.
Absolutely.
Mental health.
Yeah.
I felt different from the get-go.
I mean, we talk about, the ism before the alcohol, right? And it's the classic stuff from the big book, right? The irritable, restless, and discontent.
Yes.
And I know that when I look back at my history, I can see it when I'm 7, 8 years old, long before. And it sounds like that's what you're saying, right? The ism when you were 5. How old were you when your parents got divorced?
I was about 9.
Okay. So with the trauma thing, you talk about how everybody has trauma, right? When the first time someone said that to me, I was like, I don't have trauma. Like
I
nothing.
said that too.
Nothing big has ever happened to me. And this guy, one of the therapists, his name's Irving. He was like, "Oh, well, Joseph," he's like, "your parents were divorced, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "But that's not traumatic." He's like, "Do you think it was traumatic for 4-year-old Joseph?" And I was like, "You son of a..."
Calling me out. Yes.
Yeah. So sounds like you had that kind of like other, right? Like feeling different from the other kids pretty young.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it wasn't because it wasn't because I didn't excel in school. I always did. I was one of those kids who could barely studied and made A's.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on. But I will tell you that my dad remarried rather quickly,
Mm-hmm.
in my memory at least. And that was really difficult. And I'll say kids tend to blame themselves
Mhm.
for things. And I didn't consciously blame myself, but I'm sure that there was a part of me that
Mhm.
felt like, what could I have done differently to make dad stay?
Yeah. So what was the relationship like with the stepmom? I mean, was it like, were you
Not good.
evil stepmother?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
She was very emotionally abusive.
Mhm.
And I never considered myself an abused child until I really did a lot of work around it the last couple of years. And I realized that was really difficult because I just wanted love.
Yeah.
And she was very cold,
Mhm.
very, cut off, and didn't like it when I was affectionate with my dad.
Mhm.
She didn't like it when I would sit on his lap. She didn't like it when we would play around. And my dad kind of changed.
Mhm.
He went from being this sort of cool cowboy motorcycle riding guy to very, cold and non-emotional and, and so, and there were a lot of times when she would treat me one way when no one was around, but
Mhm.
when my dad, my brother were around, she'd treat me differently.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was a hard thing, and so I tried for years and years and years to win her or get her acceptance and get her love.
Mhm. Yeah. And a lot of addicts, and I think you fall into the category of like, we tend to be very empathetic people. Like we feel things very deeply, like everything's just turned up almost like a notch higher than for everyone else, how we feel emotions and
agree.
stuff. So I'm sure, 9-year-old, 10-year-old Courtney is just Courtney. Tina
People
Courtney.
do that all the time.
9-year-old, 10-year-old Tina, like having your dad pull away, having this new woman in your life probably was, traumatic.
And then there was the loyalty I felt for my mom.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I can't be nice to this chick.
Oh,
Right.
But my mom, I'll just say, it was like, she was like if you could create like the nearest perfect mom, that was my mom.
Yeah.
Very loving, very kind. And she would listen, but encourage me to, well, you're going to go see your dad and it means a lot to him. Never said a bad word about
Yeah.
my dad,
Yeah.
ever. So
just so I can have a mental picture of your mom, what TV mom would you compare her to? Like, is she like a Marsha, a Brady Bunch mom?
kind of like the Happy Days mom, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Very, but less fancy.
Yeah. Okay.
Minus the pearl necklace and the skirts.
Yeah.
She was like a cross between that Marion Cunningham and Mary Poppins.
Oh, wow.
Because Mary Poppins was very kind of loving. She sang and
Yeah.
but she was strict.
So your mom's British?
She was not.
No.
Yeah. I mean, she was amazing.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were mentioning where you went to college, right? So you at least finished college, right? So
Yes. Thank
so
God.
things didn't go bad immediately, because so often we hear like, oh man, I was 13 years old and things were fucked already.
Well, let me just say this. I used drugs successfully for a very long time. I was injecting cocaine in high school.
Oh, wow.
Got hepatitis B. I was doing, pills and weed and all those things in high school because it was my way to finally fit in. I finally found a crowd that I could fit in with. And I could leave it alone also.
So let's rewind a little bit there. good upbringing. There's no drugs in your house, right? Like
Right.
no history of alcoholism. So, what was your view of drug use before you started using drugs? And then how did that change when you started using drugs?
That's really interesting. I've always been a big music fan, big music lover. I play a lot of different instruments, and I went through this period when my parents split, where I just isolated. I'd go in my room and I would listen to the Rolling Stones and Pink Floyd and, AC/DC and all these bands. And all of my heroes did drugs.
Yeah.
Aerosmith. They all did specifically heroin. And I thought that was so cool. And I couldn't wait to be old enough to do drugs.
Yeah.
And I think that's, people say no one wanted to grow up and be a drug addict. I mean, I kind of did.
I really identify with that because like growing up, we're of different eras, but like, the Doors have always been popular with the druggy kids, right? So like, I remember being 10, 11 years old, and the big one for me was Sublime. They hit when I was 10, 11 years old, and the singer had just died of a heroin overdose, and they sang about all kinds of drugs. And the other one was there's this band called Everclear.
Yeah.
That they sang about heroin use all the time. And it didn't sound not cool.
Right. Right.
So, okay. So we both had this like early glamorization of drugs.
Yes.
But so you're excited. You're like, I can't wait until.
Because drug education back when I was in school wasn't DARE. It was a narcotics officer would come into the school and had these drugs behind like these display cases. Yeah. And then he would light marijuana and say, this is what weed smells like. And if you smell it in your home, you should call the police. This is in the 70s.
I mean, that sounds a lot like DARE, really.
Really?
Yeah. Because they would come in and they had like a little display board. They had like it was in containers, right? Yeah. And I just remember they would tell us all the different names. Like they're like, oh, this is, marijuana. You can call it weed, pot. And growing up in Laredo, they would do the Spanish slang terms for them too. So there was a term for
Mota.
Well, for a joint, it was called a toque. And we just thought that was so funny.
Right.
I remember being like in 6th grade and be like, toque.
That sounded interesting.
They make it sound really good. Dare, yeah.
And the way my mind works is when they would tell you about the consequences of it, my mind went to, wait a minute. So you're telling me if I ingest this chemical, I'm not going to care whether I live, die, have money. I don't care. I need to know what something that good feels like.
That sounds great.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. So when do you start using drugs? How old are you? Like, what's that experience like?
It started when kids at school would raid their parents' medicine cabinets and bring Valium and different Quaaludes back then, speed, those Black Beauty speeds, and the older crowd will know what I'm talking about, to school. And I was the daredevil. I had to one up everybody. So it was started with that because no one was old enough I wasn't old enough to like, no one's going to sell pot to a 12-year-old, but I would take those pills. Yeah. And later on, I started smoking weed. I discovered 3 things simultaneously. Pink Floyd, specifically Wish You Were Here, Star Trek, the original, and marijuana. And those 3 things together were just like, as a kid, that was my escape. I loved it.
Yeah. And so do you remember like what, you mentioned earlier, kind of feeling different and feeling like the other kids, were a certain way. And, do you remember like what the drugs did for you in that regards when you first started doing them?
They gave me a sense of belonging for sure. Plus now I'm hanging out with the older kids, which,
automatically cooler.
Automatically cooler. And that's the main thing that I remember about it, more so than the effects of the actual drugs. Yeah. It wasn't until I started, smoking alone that I really learned about the effects of it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. See, the first time I ever smoked weed, it was by myself.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I had a very different experience, but now, so you said by the time you got out of high school, you were shooting cocaine, right?
Yeah,
So that
while I
sounds
was
like,
in high
yeah.
school, and I had to stop because I got hepatitis and had to drop out of school and be quarantined to my house. It was a whole thing.
So that's a pretty rapid progression there,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, what got you there? Because most kids, right, normal kids, right, who are
Yep.
experimenting or, whatever, they find a drug, they like it for a while, and then eventually they kind of move on to another one. But it sounds like maybe you were just like, all the drugs now, let's go.
I just wanted to go straight for the needle, quite honestly. For some reason, that fascinated me. I had been taking allergy shots since I was little, so I wasn't afraid of needles.
Mhm.
And I started just giving those allergy shots to myself, so I had access to syringes
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Yeah, that's wild because in my addiction, one of my boundaries was always, I'll do anything except use a needle. And I mean, obviously that boundary got crossed at a certain point.
Right.
But I was always terrified of needles. Couldn't even shoot myself up until the day I was dope sick and there was no one around, and
Yeah.
figured it out real quick.
Yeah. And it
so
was
that's
mainly
fascinating.
recreational. It
Yeah.
wasn't every day.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a social
Yeah.
thing for me.
Yeah. And so you managed to graduate high school, get into college,
Yeah.
and continue to keep it together, huh?
I mean, I wasn't, when I got that hepatitis, I wasn't touching needles anymore. I went to college. It was mainly alcohol, weed, and LSD,
Yeah.
and Coke only when offered.
Yeah.
But it was fine. It was manageable. I could still, go to school and do all these things, but I also felt different still, because when you get to college, a lot of people are tripping acid and
Yeah.
drinking and whatnot.
Yeah. So even though you were doing like kind of the normal college thing,
Yeah.
it wasn't fixing that anymore for you.
No.
Interesting. So there's this phenomenon where there's plenty of people who, like, during the course of college, like, they meet criteria for alcoholic drug addict,
Yeah.
and then they kind of finish college and they're like, oh well, I'm a grown up now. Time to live in the real world and sort of just stop.
They kind of outgrow it.
Yeah. But
Weird.
that was not the case with you.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So what'd you major in?
Mass communications.
Mass communication.
I know.
So you major in communications, you get to college, and you don't have these thoughts of like, okay, time to be in the real world, and slow down.
I was trying to stay in college as long as possible.
Yeah.
Because I was immature and I didn't, I didn't want to get out and be an adult. I loved it. I lived in the dorm and I loved that scene. But also that's when I started playing in bands. I started playing guitar since I was young. And by the time I was in my senior year of high school, I was playing out at bars with different bands. I was always the most sober person in my band, though, because alcohol's never been my thing.
Yeah.
Not to say I haven't tried it hundreds of times, but alcohol was not. Alcohol never did for me what it does to other people.
Yeah. But if there's nothing else around,
not even.
Really?
Not even. No. But I was, so in college, I would play in these bands, and half the dorm would come out and see me, and it was very exciting. So there's that fills that sense of like belonging and love and acceptance and being cool is always
everybody's looking
important.
at me and they're clapping. And
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you were able to kind of, as you put it, use successfully for a long time.
Yeah.
Where does things start to kind of cross the line to where you start to realize like it's not going so great?
There was I didn't become an addict till I was 29.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you were an addict when you were 14.
Not in the classic sense. So let me just explain.
Yeah.
After college, I worked, traveled around a little bit, met my future husband. He came backstage at one of my shows, fell in love. We ended up getting married, having kids. We were living in downtown Chicago, which is amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
And I got pregnant. And we got married while I was pregnant. We'd already been together for 5 or 6 years.
Uh-huh.
And when I went to go give birth, after I've got twins, by the way, I, pushed them both out, took them home the next day.
Yeah.
And they gave me pain pills, ibuprofen for the pain. Now, I'd taken, Vicodin and whatnot before for wisdom teeth and whatnot. And I would take them like a regular person. I'd take however many I needed and throw away the rest and forget about it. But this time, I took those pills and it did something different. And I can remember that moment, that light bulb moment, because drugs never gave me anything. They took things away. They took away my fear, my anxiety. How am I going to keep these two little tiny babies alive?
Yeah.
And I thought, man, this is the best antidepressant ever. Why
great.
Why are they messing around with Prozac? This is it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I could handle 2 babies, keeping the house clean, looking good, doing it, and people would say, like, you're doing such a great job as a mom handling this. And that only like made me want to do it more.
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
Yeah. So opiates was like your little superpower, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're raising these kids, you're young, you're getting into the opiates and kind of realize, they're doing the trick. They're fixing all the things that you've always needed fixing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
How long are you able to keep that going?
For a while.
Yeah.
I mean, it started off slow and then it progressed to doctor shopping. Yeah. And this is before all the pharmacies were interconnected and whatnot. So I could go all over town and complain of back pain and get prescriptions. And it got to be kind of a pain. So I stole a prescription pad and started writing my own.
Yeah.
And I did that for a couple of years. So over that time span was about 5 years time span. And then I got arrested.
I was going to say, so when did the consequences start?
I got arrested. And by then I was a school teacher. I taught kindergarten and second grade.
Yeah. And how old are your kids at this point?
My kids are, they're in first grade. Okay. So they're 7. Yep. I got arrested and I was terrified.
What'd you get arrested for?
For the charge is fraudulent possession of controlled substance, basically forgery.
Yeah, because of the prescription pad,
right? And it's funny because it never occurred to me that A, it's a felony, B, it's a federal offense.
Yeah,
and boy, it was hard. They detective called my phone, left a message, and told me I needed to come down to the station. And all I could think about is I can't let my husband know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
not like I should stop doing drugs.
No.
And it was just like, just got to make sure I don't get busted.
I can't let anyone know. Let me see what I can figure out. Maybe I can wear a short skirt and get away with it with charm, Didn't go down like that. And it was bad. So I finally had to tell him so we could get a lawyer for me.
God, I can just imagine your husband, like the shock of like, I got this wife, she's a school teacher, twins, life is good. We're living in Chicago, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
A little idyllic life. And then just your wife comes to you one day and says, hey, like, by the way, addicted to opiates, forging prescriptions.
I think he had noticed. So he's a normie.
Yeah.
He's one of these people that can take it or leave it. Even like early on before the kids, we'd been to parties and we would do a few lines of coke. Yeah. And he would say, okay, I'm ready to go. And I'd say, well, what do you mean? There's still a pile on the table.
There's more cocaine.
Why?
You haven't finished yet.
Why would we leave?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, that's interesting that you asked that because that's a conversation we've never really had, or at least I wasn't willing to hear about it.
Yeah.
What his reaction was. A lot of fear, pissed off, going to, I'd gone to the police station and I can remember the detective had gone around town and had copies of all these prescriptions I'd written over the year.
Yeah.
And he started just laying out copies on the table.
Yeah.
And
Walgreens, CVS,
yes, Costco, Albertsons. And he said, and it was like he was dealing cards, and he said, confess to one of them and I will dismiss the rest. Thank God. So I confessed to the Klonopin.
Yeah.
because I thought, oh, that was better than the
benzo's better than the opiate.
Yes,
That's right.
exactly. And, he said, get a lawyer and whatnot. And I did. And I never heard back from them for like 4 or 5 months.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, oh, I'm off the hook.
Yeah.
It slipped through the cracks
Yeah.
until they came to my house, grabbed me, threw me on the ground and arrested me.
Yeah. And so you learned your lesson and you never used drugs ever again after
the
that.
end.
Yeah.
No. They arrested me, and all I kept thinking was like, don't wake up the kids. My husband was at the movies, and I couldn't get in touch with them. So I called my my pastor's wife, and she came over and watched the kids. Yeah. They let me sit there they said, if you got 15 minutes to get someone over here, we won't take your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was very because I'd already, gotten a lawyer and done all that stuff. But that was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just tell you, I never told my family at all.
They had no idea.
They didn't find out till years later. My dad and my brother are both Air Force pilots. Mm-hmm. And they're pretty high up, And so every few years they do, for their security clearance, they would check the whole family.
Yeah, to see if there's any vulnerability.
Yes, right. And my brother came to visit me one night and said, yeah, I guess 2 years ago you got arrested. Why didn't you tell me? And I was like, no, I was terrified. And he said, I can't believe that you kept, like, how scary was that for you to just not tell anybody? Yeah. But there's the lying, there's the secrecy, and keeping up the front, all that. And I was put on probation for 3 years for that. But I couldn't stop using. Yeah. I could not stop. So
did you want to stop?
Listen, I never wanted to be sober.
Yeah.
I just wanted to do drugs without consequences.
Yes.
That's it.
That was me.
Right?
That was me. How do I get high without bad shit happening?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the drugs that I was doing while on probation were things like, whippets or like anything that I thought I could get away with.
Yeah.
And I would have to call every night, see if my number came up, to have to report to the probation office and whatnot. It was a nightmare. I was snorting Wellbutrin. I was crushing up anything that I thought might get me high. And I
used to do that. Like anytime I would get out of treatment or detox, and my mom would kind of keep me on lockdown for a while, and I'm like, what is in this house,
right? Yeah,
that I can use now, like air duster or whatever. I just need to not feel like me.
And that's when I discovered K2.
Yeah.
The spice.
Oh, that shit's bad.
Oh, I loved it.
Oh, no. Ugh.
It was the best.
See, I was sober by the time K2 came out, and I was working with adolescents, and they were all on probation, right? Because that's adolescents go to IOP when they're on probation, period.
Yeah.
And so they all were into the K2 because there was no testing for it.
Right. And you could buy it legally.
And it was like frying these kids' brains.
Yeah.
Like frying their brains. Anyway.
That's what I did. And
so you were into the K2.
I smoked it all day, every day.
Wow.
Like cigarettes all day, every day.
And so like during all this, like you're still raising your kids. Yeah. You never lost custody, never nothing. Yeah.
No. And so I did while I was on probation.
Yeah.
I realized I'm not going to make it the 3 years unless I don't go somewhere and at least try to get off the drugs. Yeah. I went to treatment. Strangely, I had to petition the court to go to treatment.
Really?
Because it was a forgery charge. I had to petition them and say, like, no, I'm a drug addict. And they told me for community service I should go work serving the homeless. And I was like, I'm a drug addict. Yeah. Why would you send me into the belly of the beast right there where I can get... Yeah. And so I came back. So I went to treatment. My husband showed up and told me he wanted a divorce while I was in treatment.
Yeah.
And let me just say, I was so pissed at him for doing it that way.
Yeah.
But looking back, what a wonderful thing he did, because he knew I was in a safe place.
Yes.
Where I couldn't freak out. I wouldn't get hurt. I had all the support. And B, it's a lot to ask anybody to spend the rest of their life with somebody that's an alcoholic or a drug addict.
Man, ask somebody to spend a month.
Exactly. And it took me a long time
Yeah.
to really recognize that. He ducked out early, and looking back, it's probably a good thing because it was, 13 more rehabs after that.
Oh, so you didn't stay sober the first time?
Not even close.
So,
but
what year are we talking about here? The first time you go to treatment?
First time I go is 2001.
Okay.
2001. Yeah. And I came out and did the 90-90 and had no interest in anything but just hanging around a bunch of drug addicts, and I felt comfortable there.
Yeah. With the sober drug addict.
With the sober drug. Some were sober, some weren't. It was kind of a rough group that I was part of. But there came a point when, we're getting a divorce. Yeah. And we agree on 50-50 custody, which in theory sounds great. For us, it was really, really hard. It was so difficult for my kids to spend a week at my house, a week at his house, pack a suitcase every Friday. It was a lot.
You know what they're suggesting now?
What?
Is you get a house and you get an apartment, and the kids stay at the house all the time, and the grown-ups are the ones who rotate in and out. Yeah.
We wrote it in wherever the kids went, the dog went. So the dog was the thing.
The dog was their anchor?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it turned out that when they were with him, it was game on for me.
Yeah.
When they were with me, I was dope sick.
Yeah.
Because I didn't, I was trying not to do drugs in the house with them there. And this went on for a little while, less than a year. And finally, I realized, like, I'm going to lose the kids. My dad called me and he said, if you don't get your shit together, you're probably going to lose the kids forever. And instead of just doing a U-turn and coming home, I went into the dope house, got my dope, and then came home. But it was too late by then. My husband was really not having it. And I decided with him, but really on my own, because I love my kids so much. I sat them down and I said, and by this time their dad was moving from we were in Texas. He was moving to California. And I told them, you should go live with your dad full time. And I need to go to rehab because I have a drug problem. Now, in the past, when my kids were little and I would go to treatment, we described it as like a camp for grown-ups because they were young and where you get to learn about nutrition and be happy and whatnot, But by this point, I just laid it out. And you know what, Joseph, them being twins in the same environment, it's affected them very differently. But I can remember what they said when I said, I have a drug problem. They looked at me and one of them said, oh, you have a drug problem? I thought you were going crazy. And then the other one said, we thought you hated us.
Oh, my God.
They were like, drugs we can fix. We can't fix crazy.
Yeah.
We can't fix if they were relieved. And that was such the hardest decision I've ever made. And I don't regret it for a second.
Yeah. I can't imagine how, I have 3 kids.
Yeah.
And luckily, I got sober before I ever had kids.
Yeah.
So they've never had to, go through that specifically. But I know when they're out of town for more than a day or two, I'm freaking out. It's really great for about 24 hours. And then I'm like,
oh, I missed him so much.
Yeah.
And, I had been, I'd been a stay-at-home mom for the first couple of years, and then I was a teacher. So I was always with them.
Now, so the pain of that experience got you to quit doing drugs forever?
No, not even close. Shocking. And that's that no choice aspect, right?
And that's what a lot of people don't get, right? Is you can go through stuff like that, which is one of the most painful things, I can imagine for a human being to have to go through. And that doesn't mean you're just going to stop doing drugs.
That's what the big book calls frothy emotional appeal.
Yeah.
Seldom suffices. It wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with love. That my addiction had nothing to do with how much or how little I love my kids. I loved them enough to not be with them.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of love.
That's huge.
That's a sacrifice because I just didn't want them to be affected by what I couldn't control.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, okay. So When you send your kids with their dad, do you immediately turn your energies towards like, now I'm getting sober for real? Or do you go live the life a little
It's a
while?
little bit blurry, but yeah, I think I went through this deep depression. I lived the life. I wanted to show up for them, but I wasn't able to. And, I just got really heavy into the drug, because now nothing was stopping me. Now I had no accountability.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to control or hide your drug use, it's not fun.
Yeah.
So I went hard, and then I started to, go back and forth to treatment. A lot of it was my dad. I would go, I kind of wanted to be sober, but not really. I had a back problem, right? I wanted people off my back.
Yeah.
So I would go and, I've always thrived in rehab. Honestly, I've always kind of liked.
I've always enjoyed treatment too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I liked it.
Because I'm not lonely anymore, and I'm a user that always used alone for the most part.
You got like new friends and high school drama.
Yes, exactly. And so somewhere in that time period, right before the divorce, I should back up and say my mom died.
Yeah.
She died in a house fire. Suddenly, unexpected.
Wow.
Just really, really difficult.
Well, there's some more trauma right there.
Huge trauma.
Yeah.
Huge.
So,
trauma. Yeah.
So, not to rush you, but like, in and out of treatment.
Yep.
Sort of wanting to get sober, not really wanting to get sober. At what point are you like, I truly want to stop doing drugs?
We're gonna have to fast forward a lot till I get to that point, to be honest. The first time I went to Recovery Unplugged was about 4 or 5 years ago. I stayed sober for almost 3 years. And if I could have found a way to do drugs with no consequences, though, I would have chosen that.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. But I really liked the way it felt to not be a slave to anything. I liked to have a job, and I was working as an accountant for the state of Texas, and all these wonderful things were happening for me. COVID hit, took me out, hardcore. But to fast forward to your question, it was almost a year ago when I really, really decided, and the event around that, there were a lot of events around that. I'd been homeless and whatnot. I lived in a laundromat for a while. It was open 24 hours, and I was fine with it, which is insane. But
that's the pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, in my defense, that Wi-Fi, there had free Wi-Fi there.
And a snack machine in the corner.
They did. And it was next door to one of those stores that sold the glass roses, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yep.
It's big crackhead and tweaker. But when I came to Recovery Unplugged's detox last September 1st, and they sent me someplace else because I'd already been through that program.
That's the thing we do. That's the thing we do. We're like, you know what? We love you.
I was pissed.
Go somewhere else.
I was so mad. And I'm so grateful now because I needed to get my ass kicked a little. So the thing that happened was I was at this other program, Ascension House program. And after a week, got my first phone call, and I called one of my kids, and she said to me, "I know everything." It's like, what are you talking about? Because in my mind, my kids maybe knew, but when I was high, but they're great kids. They're dream kids. Never been in trouble. They're too polite to ever say anything. But this time I got laced up.
Yeah.
She said,
by your kid.
By my kid, who said, I can tell when you're high on the phone. I can tell by your voice, by what you look like, by everything. And I love you, and I will always honor you and respect you, but I'm not in a hurry to see you. Now, by this time, it had been 2 years since I'd seen either one of my kids.
She was still good with it.
Yeah. Because they would say they're busy. No one's busy for 2 years.
Yeah.
They just didn't know how I was going to show up, if I was going to show up, and they couldn't take it anymore. So she told me this, and I'll never forget it. And she hates that I give her this moment because she goes, I want it to be about you and not me. But what she said just like knocked me on my ass. She said, I don't care if it's 6 months, 6 years, whatever. When I see you, I don't want you to be sober. I want you to be recovered. And that was that moment of clarity.
Like, I don't want you to just not be high.
Right. I want to see it in your eyes and hear the clarity in your voice. That's what I want. And until that happens, I'm going to have to love you from afar. That got real.
Good boundaries.
Okay, so two
Look at
things
that.
went through my head. One was, ouch, that really hurts. But two was like, no one's going to ever mess with my kid. She knows
Yeah.
how to draw a boundary. How healthy. How did I produce this? And I'll say this, having twins, that one that I just told you about, she went to Al-Anon, really participated big time in that. My other daughter did not. And it affected her very, very differently. Yeah. But that was that moment when I decided. I went back into the group the next day. I told the program coordinator, I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I can quote the big book. I've been to thousands of meetings. I've chaired meetings. I've sponsored.
I know all the stuff.
I know everything, but I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I made that decision to tell her, whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do, regardless. And when people ask me, because like I was in and out of treatment for like 6 years, and when people ask me like what was different, like the last time versus all the other times, I hate that question, but go ahead.
But it was basically exactly what you said. I was like, well, I did what they told me to do. I quit questioning it. They said go to sober living. Okay, go to sober living. They said work the steps. Sure, work the steps. They said move to Kerrville, Texas. I said, where is it? Let's go.
Yeah.
I was done arguing with them. So we're running towards the end of our time.
Okay.
Which is sad because we just got you sober.
I know, right?
but just real quick, what's life like now?
Life is amazing. I'm going to have a year sober coming up this September 1st.
That's like 2 weeks.
That's like 2 weeks from now. Super excited about that. I also decided to apply to Texas Tech to get my master's in counseling.
Oh, with the addiction studies program.
Yes, yeah. Want to help other people.
I know people.
And then for the first time since I got sober, I'm going to visit my dad at his house. He's inviting me to
Florida?
Into his home. No, he's got a place in North Carolina now. Into his home. And when I told my daughter, the one that has been very sort of distant, taking her time with this, I told her about it and she said, I want to come. So I'm actually going to see her. And it's been 3 years. We're going to go to North Carolina together, and then she's going to come back to Austin, spend a couple of days with me, and we're going to ACL.
You got to bring her by to see the place so that we can all say hi to her.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that. My life is on the outside, it looks great. I've got a job that I love, but honestly, the best is the inside. I've never felt more at peace. I've never felt more serene. I'm in sober living, and I committed to doing whatever they told me, which was 2 years. Okay.
Fuck it. What do you got to lose?
I'll do anything. I really don't care.
Yeah.
I'll stay there the rest of my life if it means I don't have to go back, because I would rather die than go back. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Tina, we're gonna have to bring you back for a part 2.
I think so too.
Because normally Jason's the one who's really good at keeping the pace of our time, and I'm just the worst.
I've got a long story.
I just I like the follow-up questions, But so let's go ahead and move on to rapid fire question time.
All right.
It's rapid fire question time.
All right, we're gonna start easy, and they're gradually gonna get harder.
Okay.
Tacos or pizza? You can only pick one for the
Pizza.
rest of your life.
Pizza.
Done. Okay. We're going to go 2 food-themed ones in a row. Ben and Jerry's comes to you and they say, Tina, we heard the podcast. Your story's amazing. We want to make a Tina Courtney signature ice cream flavor of Ben and Jerry's. What do you want to put in it, and what are we going to call it?
Oh, wow. We're going to call it Sweet Tea's Dream, because that's Sweet Tea's my nickname.
All right.
And it's going to have Oreos and chocolate and vanilla and some cookie dough.
Love it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Just all the sugar.
All of it. Yeah.
All the sugar. All right. How many days have you been sober?
Okay, I'd say roughly 355, maybe.
Yeah, you got a kind of an easy one, right?
Yeah, I
'Cause
know,
we just
right?
talked about it. All right. This one's for Jason. Time travel vacation. You can go to any time period, any place in history. Where do you go and what do you do?
I'd just go back to spend another day with my mom.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. You're having a bad day. You're stressed, you're anxious, whatever. You got a lot going on. What's the music that you throw on to get you into the space you need to be?
When I'm in those moods, I get on one of those Lime scooters and I put my headphones on, and I'm gonna play some 80s metal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like what kind of 80s metal? Are we talking like Warren?
kind of like Iron Maiden, maybe
Not
some Judas Priest, Ronnie James Dio.
Okay, so metal, not hair metal.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Metal.
All right. Last but not least, Courtney, we have I did it again.
Yeah, it's okay.
Which is weird because I talk to you all the time and I call you.
Everybody does it. It's
I
totally
think
fine.
I'm
I
nervous.
got 2 first names. Do I
think
make
I'm
you nervous? That's weird.
It's weird. No, when Jason's not here, I feel all this pressure.
You're doing great.
Oh, thank you. You're doing great. The last thing we do is, our podcast goes out on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and we have, tons and tons of people listen to the show. This is your opportunity to leave a message to them, whatever it is that you'd like to say.
I would like to say what worked for me was taking every single suggestion, not just the ones I wanted to, but every single one. Also want to say that shame is not helpful. Realize that when we say we're powerless over, our addiction or alcohol, we're not just powerless over the drug or the drink, we're powerless over our behaviors when in active addiction. In other words, sober Tina would never drive under the influence with my children in the car. But when I'm using, I'm powerless over that. It's not an excuse, but it is a way to get, for me to sleep at night and not feel ashamed. We're
Love it.
powerless.
Love it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you for taking the time to come out and for sharing, your story. I know that I really enjoyed it. I'm sure all our listeners will as well. To our listeners, thank you for watching, listening. Don't forget to like, follow, share, subscribe, leave a review, all that good stuff, because that helps us get the word out to more and more people who need to hear the things we talk about here on Talksicology. So until next time, as we like to say, there's 1,000 ways in and 1,000 ways out. We hope you find yours.